Alright, we are live. How is it going, guys? How are you guys? I hope everybody's doing well. Hey Nugs, what's up, buddy? Thought I'd do a show here real quick. Daniel, what's up, buddy? Parody. Yeah. Yo, Steve-O, C-Grip, what's up? Yo, freaking Oracle, what's up, buddy? How's it going, guys? So, do you know back in 1985, Carl Sagan talked to Congress about what he felt would bring on the end of the world, I guess? At 14, this is really weird. That YouTube is doing something really weird. But he doesn't start talking until right here.
I'm very pleased to be here. Can somebody turn my microphone on? Thank you. I can do it myself, I see.
Okay.
Some years ago, when
It's Carl Sagan.
the first results of our study, the so-called TAPS study on nuclear winter, were becoming clear to those of us working on it,
Talking about nukes.
long before it was publicly released, it became clear to me that there were serious policy implications on the issues.
Let's get
not
some
only,
serious policy implications on this bong hit. What do you guys say?
the consequences in the northern hemisphere.
It's top of the hour. No
but
law
the
regarding cannabis. Cannabis is
consequences,
for all.
elsewhere in the world, the possibility which emerged clearly from our calculations that something much smaller, Representative Lujan, than a full exchange would still lead to almost the same effect as the full exchange, provided cities were targeted. In fact, on that, one of our cases was a case where less than 1% of the world's strategic arsenals were employed, but artificially constrained to be targeted on cities only. And there we got temperature declines of tens of degrees for months.
Yeah, right, James Lucid? That's a good question. What would you say about Fukushima?
Being a novitiate in this strange subject, I felt the need to talk to more experienced people.
Jeff Lund,
and,
what's up,
we
buddy?
were able to put together a private discussion, in fact, here in the Capitol, with a range of senior workers in this field in previous administrations and other masters of dark arts.
Speed it up a little bit.
The distribution was very good. The most senior member of the group who was there was April Harriman, in fact. And at the end, I presented what the scientific results were, presented some hint of what seemed to me the policy implications. And one response by a senior practitioner was the following. He said, look, if you think that the mere prospect of the end of the world is enough to change thinking in Washington and Moscow, you clearly have not spent much time in those places.
That's funny.
And so by these standards, perhaps the Department of Defense report represents slight progress. I see.
Do you guys realize what he just said? In case it went right over your heads, I want to just say, he said, you could tell governments that the end of the world is coming. They don't care. They don't care. Whether or not they'll let on that they know it's coming or not, that's a whole other story, man. Regardless of that, they don't care. because they know there's nothing they can do to stop it. They can act like AOC and Bernie Sanders. They can pretend and act like, or even Joe Biden can pretend like they can fix it. Or you can be, the exact opposite and act, Donald Trump and the Republicans and act like there's nothing to see here at all. There's no problem at all, and we're going to be just fine. Everything's just fine. Nothing to see here at all. Either way, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter whether you have a party that's in power that's promising you they can fix something that you can't fix, or whether you have a party that's in power that's ignoring the problem altogether, saying we don't have a problem at all. What does it really matter either way? What's it come down to? A woman's right to choose, racism, stuff like that, gender stuff. If that's what it comes down to, then that's how you base your decision.
The charge given by the Congress to the Department of Defense requests for, quote, comprehensive study, requests for, quote, detailed review, requests for, quote, thorough evaluation. And I must say, I do not see this report as coming within light years of that requirement. If this were a paper assigned in a graduate seminar at Cornell University, I think I would give it a D, maybe C minus.
Well, that's not light
if
years.
I was in a friendly mood.
That's a
For 40 years,
back.
the Department of Defense has
years.
in effect assured us that there are no long-term climatic consequences of nuclear war, that the climate is not endangered. There are reports by the government through the years saying nothing to worry about. Then some scientists stumble upon a possible global climatic catastrophe, attendant, as I said, even to a relatively small nuclear war. At first we hear that this is liberal propaganda, or distortions invented by proponents of the nuclear freeze.
You guys trying to dab and
then
shit?
Then there are other studies. They tend to confirm the general picture. Then the National Academy of Sciences, the Royal Society of Canada, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, the President of the United States, and eventually even the Department of Defense.
You guys trying to get all dabby with it and shit?
To worry about here. Nuclear winter, if it were brought about, would be a disaster unparalleled in the history of the human species. And what is the Department of Defense's response? It's that while nuclear winter might happen...
Remember, this was 1985, guys.
Of course, nothing has changed. That the correct answer to nuclear winter is to continue to build many more weapon systems in aid of reducing weapon systems at some future unspecified time. Peculiarly, nuclear winter turns out to justify all the policies that the administration has just embarked on. Remarkable coincidence. There are no agonizing reappraisals. There are no changes in doctrine or policy. From their point of view, the discovery of a doomsday machine hiding in the arsenals of the United States and the Soviet Union hardly matters at all. It doesn't change anything. And by comparison, let's compare this with the study released just 2 months earlier by the Royal Society of Canada, the equivalent of the National Academy of Sciences of our northern neighbor, which says, we conclude that the nuclear winter hypothesis does indeed modify the global strategic position, and then they go on to indicate in what way, and I'll mention a couple things about that report in a moment. Mr. Weinberger's 70-page report talks about the possibility that dangers from nuclear winter will be comparable to the other horrors of nuclear war. Well, how bad are those other horrors? According to a study by the World Health Organization, chaired by Nobel laureate in medicine Sune Bergström of Sweden, as many as 1.1 billion people might be killed outright in a central exchange involving not just the United States and the Soviet Union, but Europe, China, and Japan.
Wow.
And another 1.1 billion people would die subsequently from the prompt effects if they did not receive immediate medical attention, which of course would be unavailable because the doctors and hospitals are by and large concentrated in the target zones.
Concentrate.
Well, 1.1 plus 1.1 equals 2.2.
Okay, stop
2.2 billion people, according to this estimate.
Now.
Obviously, nobody knows for sure. Might be more, might be less. Well, that's roughly half the people on the planet, just a little less. If,
and a half minutes
as the
away from a
Department of Defense now acknowledges, the long-term effects, radioactive fallout, nuclear winter, and so on, might be comparable or even larger, then the Department of Defense now acknowledges that nuclear war might mean the extinction of the human species. And in that sense, this represents an interesting departure for the Department of Defense. Certainly, I would say nuclear war means the destruction of our global civilization, and a not incidental aspect of which would be the destruction of the United States as a functioning political entity. Nuclear war is bad for government, bad for labor, bad for business, bad for people on a scale that remains unreflected, as far as I can see, in this administration's policies. Now, one significant consequence of nuclear winter is that nations far removed from the conflict, nations, if there are any, that have no part of the quarrel between the United States and the Soviet Union, nations in the Southern Hemisphere, might be utterly destroyed without a single nuclear weapon falling on their territory.
7:10.
It's a possibility. You
I
will
got
hear
a
later
big dab ready to
from
go.
Dr.
What,
Schneider and
son?
others on recent work on
gonna be
involvement
great.
of equatorial and southern latitude regions.
Had a
The Royal
gun to his
Society
head
of
from the
Canada
government
says,
to
quote,
hoodwink the
nuclear winter
public. Really?
globalizes the
James
environmental
Lucid,
impact
really?
of nuclear war.
10
Close quote.
seconds.
There is no hint of this in Mr. Weinberger's
No
report.
law regarding cannabis.
There is no reference to the Royal
Cannabis
Society of
ism
Canada
for all. Everybody
report.
cheers.
There is also
Hey, look, there's
no
a deer
reference
behind me.
to a report done by a branch of the Air Force, a branch with what I think is the best acronym in the business, CADRE, C-A-D-R-E, the Center for Aerospace Doctrine Research and Education at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama. This report was prudently commissioned by the Office of the Department of Defense something like a year ago. Mr. Wagner will doubtless be able to tell us more details about that. I visited with them in the early days of their work. This is a bunch of majors and lieutenant colonels and some faculty members from University of Alabama, Georgia Tech. Seemed to me very good, very broad, very conservative. Well, they've produced a report. Nobody seems to know where it is
It's a little baby.
or what's in it. I understand it was published in January. What is in it? It'd be most interesting to know what this branch of the Air Force designated to study the policy implications of nuclear winter has to say about it. Also be interesting to know why is it
Here
that that
comes another
report has
baby.
not been released. The military implications of nuclear winter seem to me to be very broad. For example, consider the
Babies are
question
here.
of
The
battle
babies are
management
here.
and damage assessment. There is a nuclear war. You have launched some warheads. You wish to see whether they have done what they're supposed to do. How do you find that out if the target zone is socked in with smoke and dust and fine debris? That is a narrow military consequence of nuclear winter. There's no hint in the Department of Defense's report that anything like that might be of interest to them, although doubtless it is. And then there are additional ranges of questions from how well do tanks function at minus 10 or minus 20 degrees centigrade? How well do air-breathing engines do in soot? All the way to major strategic questions, for example, the credibility of the policy of extended deterrence against a Soviet conventional attack in Europe in the face of nuclear winter. Put baldly, would the United States risk nuclear winter at home in order to defend West Germany?
They're so
That
cute.
seems to me an issue worth thinking about. Are there implications for protracted wars? Do we have to envision submarines that sit in the abyssal depths for 6 or 9 months until the soot from the first minor exchange, if we could imagine nuclear war so limited, settles out so that we can then have the second round? It seems to me that even from the narrowest of perspectives of the Department of Defense, this report is inadequate. The report does worry about what is generally called an asymmetry of perception. What if the United States is worried about nuclear winter and the Soviet Union is not worried about nuclear winter? Might there then be some strategic advantage that redounds to the Soviet Union because they are, in this hypothesis, too foolish to see what the consequences of nuclear war are? Should we also be too foolish to see what the consequences of nuclear war are? It's a very curious question, and it has lots of good answers. For example, a major high-level joint study between the United States and the Soviet Union of the policy implications of nuclear winter. If the administration is worried about what the Soviets
There's
know and
some
believe,
carrots.
there are
Are they just
means
eating
to
the
find
grass?
out. There
Yeah,
are
they're eating
means
the grass.
to enlighten the Soviet Union on this issue if there are some
This
deficiencies
is
felt.
content. Carl Sagan getting
Now,
high,
asymmetry
listening
of
to
perception
Carl
is one
Sagan
thing.
talking about the end of the
Asymmetry
world.
of vulnerability is
watching
another.
live deer with
Is there a
with-
difference
with
in the
two
consequences to the
Bambi
United States and the
twins?
Soviet Union if there were a
Bro.
global or even northern mid-latitude nuclear
This
winter?
is content.
Let me read 3 sentences from the Royal Society of Canada's report. The Soviet Union's sensitivity to small climatic fluctuations
I
is
love
well
little
known.
baby deer.
Since
I'll make it bigger for you
1972-73, they have endured repeated drought-induced or frost-triggered crop losses on a staggering scale, mostly in the new lands opened up in the last 2 decades. The nuclear winter hypothesis predicts much larger stresses for the interior of Eurasia. A nation hard-pressed to cope effectively with current natural climatic variability will face a vastly greater threat. There is no hint of asymmetry of vulnerability in the Department of Defense report. There is nothing on implications for agriculture at all. Nothing on biological implications, except that they probably would be bad. Nothing on the functioning of society after a nuclear war as a consequence of nuclear winter. Let me again just pull out the Royal Society of Canada's report. Royal Society of Canada is a very small organization, very limited resources compared to those of the Department of Defense. Here, for example, Mr. Chairman, is a graph of how the area of Canada capable of growing mature wheat declines as there are temperature declines. So with a 1 degree decline, it's all down there. With a 2 degree decline, there's hardly any place left in Canada where wheat can still grow. Be very interesting to see this graph extended into the United States. What temperature declines are necessary to wipe out agriculture in the American Midwest? This is surely within the ability of the Department of Defense to do. No hint of any such study is shown here, and incidentally in the greatly attenuated national plan for studying nuclear winter, there is no money at all allocated for biological, agricultural, social, or other implications. It's all, and strategic implications. Everything is in the physics. Now, it is, to me, remarkable
The flower bed.
that there is virtually nothing in this report about the implications of nuclear winter for the relations of the United States with other nations. And there have been, within the last year, some dozen prime ministers or national leaders of various nations, most of whom are allied with or friendly to the United States, expressing grave concerns about whether nuclear winter has
even forgetting to not do it now
for
again, pal.
those nations and their relations with the United States and the Soviet Union. And these proposed implications go all over the lot. Some nations concerned that nuclear winter makes them much more vulnerable, but other remarks, for example, one which, if I read it right in the New York Times, attributed to Prime Minister Papandreou of Greece, says if there's nuclear winter, then Greece will be destroyed anyway, never mind whether Soviet nuclear weapons fall on Greece. So what the heck, we might as well have American military bases here. At least that's what it seemed to me the New York Times was saying. I may have misread it.
You hear that?
An
1985?
unexpected consequence.
They're talking about goading on Russia back then.
On the question of funding
Nice.
for further research, I've indicated, first of all, the grave
bring some American bases
omissions
here to Greece.
in the plan that was encouraged
Great
by
idea.
the President's science advisor, George Keyworth, and as far as I can tell, Mr. Keyworth did a very good job in recognizing the
Set
seriousness
up
of the
American
problem.
bases all around the
Originally, this was
world.
supposed to be $50 million over 5 years. It now has been reduced to something like half of that, and there's an interesting question about how much of that is really new money and how much of that is simply relabeling money that has been already programmed to study areas of this sort. Also, an important part of the administration's
James.
funding plan is how little money is given
Does
to
that
the
stuff
National
ever
Science
make you
Foundation,
sick?
which is, as far as I can tell, the sole source of support for university scientists, independent scientists, scientists not already working for the Department of Defense or the Department of Energy to study this. I'm sure the administration does not wish to have its funding plan be misinterpreted, that the administration is afraid to sponsor further research on the subject by those who are not directly under their thumbs,
HHCs. Never had a
university
problem with
scientists especially. It is now subject to such a misinterpretation. For 40 years, this administration, most of the principals in it, have been implacable foes of arms control. Now, we are told, and this seems to be one of the principal conclusions of the Department of Defense's report, they say, in effect, give us $1 trillion more or less for Star Wars, and another $1 trillion more or less for new offensive weapons systems, and trust us, we are dedicated to arms control. The Department of Defense is full of people, I know from first-hand discussions, with grave misgivings about current strategic policies, current arms buildups, and Star Wars. I find it remarkable that the DoD does not consider it its duty to present both sides of the argument. Congress does not hear from experts within the government who have grave doubts on these issues. Loyalty to the official doctrines of the moment is the paramount consideration.
Cheers,
Whereas a
no
free
law
debate
regarding cannabis. Cannabis
in
isn't
which
as well.
both sides are confident that under those circumstances the truth will out, that seems to me the prudent approach to issues of this magnitude and this difficulty and this seriousness. Mr. Chairman, I have just a couple of concluding remarks, and they are on Star Wars and the connection between Star Wars and nuclear winter. And I do this only because Star Wars seems to be the leitmotif of the report by Mr. Weinberger on nuclear winter. First of all, everybody acknowledges that fully impermeable strategic defense systems are not in the cards, certainly not for the next few decades. I point out that a system which is between 90% and 99% impermeable, far in excess of what most even sympathetic critics believe can be done. But such a system would permit enough Soviet warheads through an essential exchange to destroy the United States. So even after $1 trillion, there is a very serious question of whether the United States could survive a nuclear war. I also point out that if it is true that the destruction of 100 cities, something like that, is enough to trigger nuclear winter, even a full-up Star Wars system might not be able to stop it. And if there were an exchange and the Soviets did not have their own strategic defense system, then American attacks on the Soviet Union alone would be sufficient to trigger nuclear winter, at least possibly. Second point is that one of the major Soviet responses, they've already publicly announced that they would be driven in this direction if the United States appeared ready to go ahead with a serious strategic defense initiative, is for the Soviets to build more offensive nuclear weapon systems, to saturate, to overwhelm the defense system. But that is the worst possible case for nuclear winter. What nuclear winter says is that there are too many nuclear warheads in the world. And for the response to nuclear winter to be a sequence of events which leads to the Soviets to greatly increase their arsenals seems to me profoundly foolish. Star Wars is a kind of Maginot line in the sky, and it has all of the deficiencies of the standard Maginot line, except that it's vastly more expensive and that it can lead to much graver consequences even than the Maginot line mentality did. Now, the actual situation to bear in mind in a full exchange some decades from now with a Star Wars system is to imagine something like 10,000 nuclear warheads in the air from the United States towards the Soviet Union in near space, surrounded by a cloud of something like 1 million decoys and penetration aids. Your job, should you choose to accept this assignment, is to pick out every one of the 10,000 warheads, ignore every one of the 1 million penetration aids and decoys, and you have 10 minutes or less to shoot down all the warheads. If you miss a few percent, everybody is dead. That's your problem. You're willing to bet your life on a battle management computer where the program is too difficult to be written by human beings. It has to be written by other computers. The program is too difficult to be debugged by human beings. It can only be debugged by other computers. The system cannot be tested at all short of a nuclear war. And now, the system can only be operated by a computer. No humans involved, except for the consequences.
Scary.
And if the system fails, the world is destroyed. Now, I submit to you that you have to be really Looney Tunes to bet the human race on this one. The only way to be really sure is for major, dramatic, bilateral, verifiable cuts in the strategic arsenals. Congresswoman Schneider quoted Albert Einstein, who said in 1945 that the advent of nuclear weapons had, quote, changed everything,
a nice game of chess,
except our way of thinking, and thus, he said, we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe, close quote. That's what's most missing from this report, even a hint of a change in our way of thinking. Thank you very much.
Wow.
Thank you, Dr. Sagan, for a provocative and interesting...
Dude, they go on for question and answers for 2 hours, guys. Then they move on to somebody else.
Introduction to this important subject today. We apparently have good attendance from both subcommittees. I suppose we ought to operate under the 5-minute rule in fairness to everyone.
Yes, indeed.
All right. I'll defer to my colleagues and begin with the co-chair of these hearings, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Schroyer, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sagan, you've given us a great deal to chew over. And the question is, where do we intervene? Where do we crank in this new factor of nuclear winter into existing arms control strategy of all kinds?
You're familiar with this video, Lucy?
The Defense Department does have some ameliorating limits on nuclear hits, for example. They have, under the COP, the Single Integrated Operational Plan, they do have restraint, a criteria known as restraints on collateral damage. And that means that they will normally use the smallest weapon to take out whatever the target is. They won't engage in overkill on any one target. Now that seems to indicate at least a move in the right direction, that they are thinking of minimizing damage above and beyond what is necessary to take out a particular target.
Whatever. Not
Can you conceive of another criteria that would involve perhaps an urban fire critical mass, which is what produces nuclear winter, that would take into account number of weapons, kilotonnage of weapons, number of cities hit, the spread, the distance between cities, prevailing winds, temperature, time of year, and so forth, that would give the Defense Department some kind of maximum number of nuclear weapons, total kilotonnage, distribution, and so forth, that would provide a further limiting criteria, as they've already established one, but this would be a further limiting criteria addressed to the concept of nuclear winter and addressed to the concept of
Yeah, we want to find out exactly how many nukes it's going to take to destroy it all, so we can have just one less, so we can still survive after nuclear war. That's what this guy's saying. It's like we should just regulate ourselves to so we don't trigger nuclear winter, but we should have enough nukes up until triggering nuclear winter. This guy is freaking psychotic. These guys, to them, war is fucking crack cocaine, bro. It's like crack. They're just smoking the fucking...
whatever the threshold is, assuming there is a threshold,
They're
and that we don't just move
wars.
gradually by incremental steps into a darker and darker and darker period. Can you think of some way that under this overall master plan that they call CEOP, such a factor could be introduced?
Well, first of all, the United States is not the only power that can trigger nuclear winter. So even if we were 100% convinced that the latest PSYOP makes every effort under firm controls not to
Ice, what's up,
target
buddy?
populated areas, not to do all the things that would maximize nuclear
Ice,
winter,
Anderson,
there is the question of the
free
strategies
money.
of the Soviet Union, Britain,
Ice
France,
Man,
and
how
China,
are you, bro?
all of whom, as far as we can tell,
What's going
might
on?
have arsenals large enough to trigger nuclear winter, and the other, the last three mentioned, because of the nature of their arsenals, are primarily
I
targeted
just smoked
on
one of your
cities,
dabs, bro.
entirely Soviet
Now I'm
cities.
smoking one of these other ones.
So
from the
that's the first concern that I would raise about this issue. Any solution to this problem that involves targeting raises questions of verification. How will the Soviets be able to believe us that we don't target Soviet cities? How will we be able to believe the Soviets that they don't target?
Go to the main channel, Greeny Houdini. Go to the one with 25,000 subscribers on it on YouTube. That's the one you should always go to when I'm live.
American cities. Will we have American military officers looking into the innards of the guidance system program of Soviet missiles? Will we allow
You got
Soviet
done
officers
eating?
to do the same
Yeah,
for
me
American
too.
missiles? It seems
had,
extremely unlikely. And therefore, bland assurances on the nature of the PSYOP or the
Brisket
RISOP,
sandwich
the Soviet equivalent,
with French
simply don't
fries
carry much
from,
weight, it seems to me. On the question of
Bubbaloo's.
whether U.S. PSYOP does or does not maximize nuclear winter, there are a diversity of points of view. For example, Admiral Noel Geiler, the
What's up,
former
Gary?
deputy director of the Joint Strategic Target Planning Staff, the guys who do the targeting, said in testimony before the Joint Economic Committee, can't remember, some months ago, that the co-location of strategic targets and cities and strategic targets and forests was so great that even an exchange which was designed only to hit strategic
Josh, you had
targets would
smoked
burn cities.
brisket?
And along those lines, the report by Mr. Weinberger that we were talking about
It's like on garlic toast. It
has
was
a very
so
curious
fucking good
phrase.
with coleslaw.
It says, our strategy consciously does not target population. Now, maybe consciously means intentionally, or maybe consciously is intended to be counterpoised to unconsciously. It's very hard to understand how you could imagine a central exchange in which submarine ports are not targeted, they're in cities, in which secondary airfields distributed over country are not targeted, they tend to be in cities, in which
hear what he's
command and
saying?
control facilities are not targeted, they tend to be in cities.
Did you hear what he's saying?
Any thought of
It'd be hard to imagine in a nuclear war that they're just going to go after nuclear installations. He's like, they're going to go after everything. He's like, he makes a really good point right there.
decapitation involves targeting cities, and it would be very interesting to hear a presentation on precisely how it is imagined that there would be a nuclear war at various levels in which cities are not targeted. Maybe there is such an explanation.
Well, isn't that a sort of a semantical problem? It seems to me a little disingenuous for either our country or the Russians to say they don't target cities.
I agree
What
with you
they do
entirely.
is target strategic targets, industrial targets, government targets and so forth, and they are generally located in cities.
By accident.
By accident.
Everybody's highly moral. Nobody intends to kill people. It just turns out that strategic targets kill people. That attacks on strategic targets kill people. One final thing on that, Congressman Shore. I'm not sure to what extent Congress has oversight on PSYOP. But it seems to me it's clearly and properly a highly classified area. But it seems to me that because the details of the targeting are now of general concern, that it would be useful for some selected members of Congress under some properly secure circumstances to look into PSYOP and see if what is alleged is in fact
YouTube
true.
famous.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. There seems to be an
I used
urgent
to
need
be.
for
Not
congressional
anymore.
oversight. We all have a top security clearance, but it seems to me that at a minimum, the members of the Armed Services Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Intelligence Committee should be briefed and should be involved, not only in
gonna get some
briefings, but
coffee,
in
guys.
input on just the kind of value judgments that we have been talking about. How do we factor in the concept of nuclear winter in our CEOP plan? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sagan, I'm curious about which of the many uncertainties we ought to attack first. The Department of Defense recognizes the importance of improving our understanding of some of the technical underpinnings of the convincing hypothesis of a nuclear winter. And I'm just wondering, to what degree is there some variation on the actual quantitative impact of a nuclear winter? The Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory has suggested that this concept may include, the whole concept of a nuclear winter could include a whole range of possibilities and not just an extended period of sub-freezing weather. The fact that there would be firestorms and the heat would rise, thereby minimizing the freezing temperatures. How quantitative can we get in the predicting of this information, and should we seek further research into this area on the part of the Department of Defense or other federal agencies?
Nuclear winter is not a problem amenable to experimental verification, at least not more than once, and few of us wish to perform the experiment. It is therefore restricted necessarily to the best theoretical physics, the best computing programs, and the best small simulations that can be managed. Every one of those, of course, should be vigorously pursued, and I'm concerned that the level of funding that the administration, under restricted budgetary circumstances to be sure, has proposed is inadequate. But at the same time, and by the way, other witnesses will provide their opinion on the degrees of uncertainty, Dr. Carrier, for example, who chaired the National Academy study. But at the same time, it seems to me it would be a grave error to say that we should not look into the biological, the societal, the strategic implications of nuclear winter until all the facts are in, because all the facts may never be in. Here is a sentence from the Royal Society of Canada report on this very question. At some point, the strategists have to accept the probability of the predicted consequences and incorporate that judgment into their thinking. Scientists tend to cloak their predictions in a shroud of ifs and buts. The Royal Society of Canada is not criticizing scientists, that's the nature of scientific work. But every aspect of the nuclear strategic issue is surrounded by uncertainties. And there are uncertainties. We just talked about one. What are the Soviet PSYOPs? What are the American PSYOPs? What is the uncertainty of the Strategic Defense Initiative? What is the uncertainty of the gaps, the famous window of vulnerability? How uncertain was that? It drove the arms buildup partly that we are now in. I would like to see an even-handed concern about the reliability and verifiability of every aspect of this problem.
Okay, let me also ask you, the Department of Defense report reviews some of the Soviet perceptions, and the conclusion that they reach is that the Soviets have really done very little work on this subject. Are you in agreement with that?
The Soviets, in my view, have not done nearly as much as they should, and I hope will. It is, however, fair to say that the first three-dimensional general circulation model applied to this problem that gave results, or at least one of the first two, was a Soviet program, admittedly run on a computer with roughly the capability of an IBM PC, and with a program that ultimately comes from Oregon State University. But they at least did the study. The vice president of the Soviet Academy of Sciences, Yevgeny Velikhov, told me that he has a budget of 2 million rubles for the next few years to work on this problem. It'll be very interesting to see what the money is used for, if it is. But if we are to believe his statement at face value, the Soviet program is roughly the same order of magnitude as the present U.S. program. But I think it is absolutely proper to raise public concerns about the level of the Soviet research effort in this area.
Have you been involved or had the opportunity to review some of the data that's being put together by other federal agencies, such as, for example, NOAA, who is reviewing the climactic alterations and, to some degree, the biological impacts of a nuclear winter?
I was a consultant to the National Climate Office at NOAA that put together a plan to study nuclear winter. I was one of the reviewers of it. I thought it was, by and large, a very good plan. And I testified, I believe, before Mr. Shorey's committee to that effect. But it is greatly compromised by being restricted only to the physical effects. Nothing about biology, nothing about society, nothing about policy.
Yeah, because I got it sped up. I know what you
I
mean.
think in the federal government could
He's
best
talking
supply us
fast,
with the societal
but it's
analysis of
sped
the
up.
impact of the nuclear winter.
Good question.
Does sound like the
and
60s.
I had correspondence with Mr. Keyworth on just this issue. I believe that this, as many other aspects of the nuclear winter
My streams
implications
make you
question,
feel like you're
ought
in
to be
a-
farmed out to
in a
universities,
casino.
research institutes, and so on, and not restricted
Ding,
to the
ding,
federal
ding,
government.
ding.
Thank
Let
you
me
very
pull
much.
up crypto
Gentleman
prices.
from Colorado.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
conference
Dr.
is
Sagan, again,
fucking
thank you for your help. When Congressman Leach and I initially proposed this amendment and it was passed by the Congress, it was our belief that this was an enormously important discovery, nuclear winter, and that the Pentagon should do two things. First, the Pentagon should come back to us and tell us if they believed that the concept of nuclear winter was valid. And second, if it was valid, what then were the implications? On the first, they have come back to us and said, yes, it is valid. On the second, from your testimony, and I would suggest from my own reading, they have not come back to us and really told us what the implications of this might be. Now, you said that if this were a graduate paper at Cornell, you might generously give it a D. Other actions that you have would be either to throw the graduate student out of school.
Hard to do in this case.
We can't do that with the Department of Defense. We can't throw them out, but we can. The other thing that you do is to say to them, go back and redo the paper.
Right, you give them an incomplete.
And now, it seems to me that we have the opportunity of giving them an incomplete, and one of the obligations that we have, if in fact the concept of nuclear winter does have very broad implications for our targeting, for our arms control initiatives, for how we are developing our whole strategy toward the Soviet Union,
close enough.
then we should go back to them with a series of further questions,
I need a closer
which
shave.
we in the Congress
I
clearly
need
are
a
capable
closer
of
shave
doing.
than that.
What would be the first three questions that you would go back to the Pentagon with, saying, assuming that they have agreed the nuclear winter is valid, they have done so, what then are the next three most important questions to face the Pentagon with?
First short-term question I would raise is, please provide immediately the report by Cadre on the policy and doctrinal implications of nuclear winter. I think that would not involve going back and doing any more work. It's just the Department of Defense left home part of the assignment. Then beyond that, I would, my understanding is that that report exists. It's locked up somewhere. And so there isn't any rewriting necessary. It just someone has to reach into the drawer and hand it to the Congress. That ought to be done, it seems to me, if Congress requested, in 24 hours after the request. That should surely be a significant first step.
The chick behind Carl.
Secretary Perel, there are two studies that apparently are significant and important. The Cadre study that's been referred to and the Palomar study that hasn't been referred to. At best, we would hope they could be released to the public. At the very minimum, we would hope they could be made available to members of Congress who have a top secret rating. Can you give us some assurance that these will be made available at least to the Congress and hopefully made public?
I'm not familiar. I have not read either study. Frankly, I'd like to read them first. We do have some limited pride of authorship, even though we're a bureaucracy, and if the Cadre study is as superficial and inadequate as I am informed it is, I think we'd be embarrassed to release it.
The Palomar study, too.
The Palomar study I'm not familiar with at all, but let me say, we are not going to suppress the view of some officer who may have written some opinion that differs from the opinion of the administration. There are plenty of other people who can give expression to all of those views, and we enjoy the debate. And the suggestion that we are somehow suppressing dissident ideas about the implications of nuclear winter is just fundamentally wrong and unfair.
Well, judging from your performance this morning, you're well equipped and well qualified to cope with any debate that's likely to come in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Secretary Pearl, are you of the opinion that the information that has been included in the DoD report ought to be expanded to incorporate some biological, agricultural, and
GB.
societal impact studies?
Well, let me say, I'm not sure. I think it is vital to the decisions that the government has to make to explore every last physical phenomenon associated with nuclear war. We are well persuaded that nuclear war would be terribly destructive.
22,000.
And whether it is a bottomless pit for research, given the inability to conduct experimental research, to speculate on all of the horrifying consequences of such a war.
One of the questions...
So I have no objection in principle to it, but it's not at all clear to me that this would be a useful investment of limited research resources.
One of the questions that this science committee so often is required to ask is that in the pursuit of answers to scientific questions, we're looking for scientific answers, we have to recognize when is enough research. And obviously our discussions on acid rain have pretty much concluded. We've been doing plenty of research, yet the administration is asking for more money for additional research, and oftentimes it is perceived that this might be a way of saying, well, we just want to keep on researching it because we don't want to take any mitigating measures. I think there is concern among many members of Congress, and I certainly appreciate your comment. We can spend lots and lots of money researching this thing, but at what point and what information will be necessary?
So they don't go back to Carl Sagan anymore at this point. I think that's it. That's what I wanted to hear from him. I thought that was interesting. There we go. Hope you guys like that. YouTube looks really weird for some reason. I don't know why. But oh, you think the gun bill's gonna go through? Yeah. It's not gonna change anything. Not gonna change a goddamn thing. It's a fucking toothless bill. So let them feel like they got this little victory, you know? So they can get some votes, because that's all it is. Everybody knows this bill's not gonna do anything. This was the greatest coffee. I destroyed it. Yeah, Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Yep. How much is gas in Florida? $5, give or take. You guys are a fantastic audience. Let me tell you, I love you guys so much. I will see you guys tomorrow morning. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I will see you on the next one. I base the lengths of these shows on how many people are watching, and it just doesn't constitute a show whenever there's a small amount, and that's what's going on right now. So I'm going to go ahead and end it because there's not a lot of people here. So when people want a show, they'll show up. That's what I say. Yeah, I think the coffee's gone. No more coffee. Love you guys. Bye.